Family, we're going to be getting started in about 5 minutes.
ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك، لتشم تراب بلادي وترسم أحجار ومجدك.
ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك، لتشم تراب بلادي ترسم أحجار ومجدك.
ميل على شاطئ حيف خدلك من رمل وتذكار، صورة بشوارع يافا وعلى صورة العكا مشوار.
ميل على شاطئ حيف خدلك من رمل وتذكار، صورة بشوارع يافا على صورة العكا مشوار.
ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك. القدس وشوارعها وسماها أجمل مكان. ميل عنا وسال عنا احنا للكرم عنوان.
وإذا بدك تتهنى الناصرة بتبعت سلام، قاعدة بتحلى 100 قلب بوجودك حلو الكلام.
ميل على وادي عار ركوة القهوة عالنار، شرفنا حارة حارة قلوبنا لعيونك دار.
ميل على وادي عار وركوة القهوة عالنار، شرفنا حارة حارة قلوبنا لعيونك دار.
ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر
كيف البحر بيضحك لك.
لفيت بلاد لفيت ما لقيت بجمالك ما لقيت، ولا حتى جبالك والورد وعصافيرك بتغني. يابا ليل 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 ليل
دلعونا بلادي غنيت وعالميجانا رديت، وضحية غازل بدبك وعتاب.
لحكايا ستي حنيت ولمتنا بساحات البيت، ورغيف الزيت وزعتر وشجر الزيتون.
ومشيت ياما وشقيت أغلى من بلادي ما لقيت، شعر وأدب وعلم وفن وأحلى الألحان.
لفيت بلاد لفيت
ما لقيت بجمالك
ما لقيت، ولا حتى جبالك والورد وعصافيرك بتغني.
يابا ليل 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 ليل
دلعونا بلادي غنيت وعالميجانا رديت، ضحية غازل بدبك وعتاب.
لحكاية ستي حنيت لمتنا بساحات البيت ورغيف الزيت وزعتر وشجر الزيتون
ومشيت ياما وشقيت أغلى من بلادي ما لقيت شعر وأدب وعلم وفن وأحلى الألحان أوف 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 أوف
أمان 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 يا بلادي.
Family, welcome to Gaza on Our Mind, presented by Haile Garima and Sankofa Video, Books, and Cafe. If this is your first time here or your first time joining us on the online community, welcome to Sankofa. Founded by Shrikiana and Haile Garima and named after the revolutionary film Sankofa that they produced, Sankofa is a liberated territory that holds space for the cultivation of our minds through books, films, and programming generated by and about people of African descent. I'm Jordan Cato Strudwick, one of the producers of the On Our Mind series, along with Maritu Makonnen and Abel Tesfaye here, who will be handling technology and documentation. Thank you for being here with us. Haile envisioned On Our Mind as a platform for our community to gather together in solidarity with the intersecting liberation struggles of our people who are fighting around the world against parasitic capitalism and imperialistic neocolonialism. His vision was to create a space for emancipatory art and dialogue that orients us towards the amplification of our liberation struggles. What has emerged is an empowered space for us to come together regularly as a community to share art, music, scholarship, and conversation that construct solidarity and raise our collective consciousness as we seek to understand these interlocking global struggles and raise our collective understanding of our responsibilities within them. We began with Gaza on Our Mind almost exactly 1 year ago in June 2024. So today is a year of us doing this. And so thank you for being here. This has meant a lot to me, to Abel, to Maritu, to have the support from folks in what we're doing. So thank you very much. We hosted Gaza on Our Mind every other Sunday for several months before we expanded to Sudan with Sudan on our mind, Congo with Congo on our mind, and Haiti with Haiti on our mind. Since our first Gaza on Our Mind, all donations raised through this series have gone to WPFW 89.3 FM Washington, Jazz and Justice Radio. Haile made this decision to honor WPFW's relentless advocacy on behalf of the human rights of people around the world. Our opening performer, who has been our stalwart opener for I don't know how many on our minds now, is Hassan Mubarak. Hassan is one of our community's treasures. He is an incredible, incredible musician, and we're really grateful to have him here today. So please give it up for Hassan Mubarak. One more time for Hassan Mubarak. Thank you, Hassan. We have always, since the first time that we did Gaza on Our Mind, we have included as part of our opening the following interview with Palestinian poet, novelist, journalist, 3D artist, and freedom fighter Hassan Kanafani. The interview with an Australian journalist has come to be known by the name of his most famous statement in the interview, "Conversation between the sword and the neck." This is Hassan Kanafani.
Most westernized of all Arab capitals. The evidence of the French colonial period here is as stark as it is in Quebec. In the days of the French, Beirut was a Mediterranean tourist paradise. Still, there are traces of this slowly disappearing past splendor. But as surely as the Middle East turmoil keeps away the tourists, it keeps away the business too, especially the banking business that had made Beirut the financial capital of the Middle East. Now the Lebanese army has tanks and armoured cars permanently stationed on the footpaths outside all bank buildings in the capital. Taking the place of the timid business executive, in Beirut a new business has developed. Revolution. Palestinian revolution. Palestinian guerrillas in Beirut are not like the Viet Cong. Here they're in no way illicit. They're totally legitimate. In Beirut's main street, the biggest guerrilla movement has a 3-story office building complete with all amenities. It's as modern as any in Sydney. But the machine gun-toting guerrillas standing guard outside told me no photos, and there was no arguing. Of the 11 Palestinian guerrilla movements, the most radical of all is the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP. The Popular Front is now so well organised that it even has its own daily newspaper, with a claimed daily circulation of 23,000. It was the Popular Front that hijacked and blew up 3 jet aircraft at Revolution Airport in the Jordanian desert. And it was the Popular Front that dynamited the Pan American Jumbo at Cairo. The Beirut leader of the Popular Front is Hassan Kanafani. He was born in Palestine but fled in 1948, as he puts it, from Zionist terror. Since then, he's been plotting the destruction of both the Zionists and the reactionary Arabs.
I know what I know
Thank you.
really, that the history of the world is always the history of weak people fighting strong people. Of weak people who has a correct case fighting strong people who use their strength to exploit the weak.
Turn to the fighting that's been going on in Jordan in the recent weeks. It's your organisation that's been one side of the fight. What has it achieved?
One thing, that we have a case to fight for. That's very much. These people, the Palestinian people, prefer to die standing than to lose its case. We achieved proving that the king is wrong. We achieved proving that this nation is going to continue fighting till victory. We achieved that our people could never be defeated. We achieved teaching every single person in this world that we are a small, brave nation who are going to fight to the last drop of blood to put justice for ourselves after the world failed in giving it to us. This is what we achieved.
It does seem that the war, the civil war, has been quite fruitless.
It's not a civil war. It's a people defending themselves against a fascist government, which you are defending because just King Hussein has an Arab passport. It's not a civil war.
Well, the conflict...
It's not a conflict. It's a liberation movement fighting for justice.
Well, whatever it might be best called...
It's not whatever, because this is where the problems start. Because this is what makes you answer all your questions, ask you all your questions. This is exactly where the problem starts. This is a people who is discriminated, is fighting for his rights. This is a story. If you will say it's a civil war, then your questions will be justified. If you will say it's a conflict, then of course it's a surprise to know what's happening.
Why won't your organization engage in peace talks with the Israelis?
You don't mean exactly peace talks, you mean capitulation, surrendering.
Why not just talk?
Talk to whom?
Talk to the Israeli leaders.
That's kind of conversation between the sword and the neck, you mean?
Well, if there were no swords and no guns in the room, you could still talk.
No, I had never seen any talk between a colonialist case and a national liberation movement.
But despite this, why not talk?
Talk about what?
Talk about the possibility of not fighting.
Not fighting for what?
Not fighting at all, no matter what for.
Yeah, and people usually fight for something and they stop fighting for something. So you can't tell me even why should we speak about what?
Well, stop fighting.
For what? Or talk about stop fighting, why?
Talk to stop fighting, to stop the death and the misery, the destruction, the pain.
The misery and the destruction and the pain and the death of whom?
Of Palestinians, of Israelis, of Arabs.
Of the Palestinian people who are uprooted, thrown in the camps, living in starvation, killed for 20 years, and forbidden to use even the name Palestinians.
They're better that way than dead, though.
Maybe to you, but to us, it's not. To us, to liberate our country, to have dignity, to have respect, to have our mere human rights, is something as essential as life itself.
You called King Hussein a fascist. Who else amongst the Arab leaders are you totally opposed to?
We consider the Arab governments two kinds. Something we call reactionaries, who are completely connected with imperialists, like King Hussein government, like Saudi Arabian government, like Moroccan government, Tunisian government. And then we had some other Arab governments which we call the military petit bourgeoisie governments. That's like Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Algeria, so on.
Just to end with, let me go back to the hijacking of the aircraft. On reflection, do you think that is now a mistake?
We didn't make a mistake in hijacking them. The contrast. We did one of the most correct things we ever did.
That was Hassan Kanafani, the conversation between the sword and the neck. Our next clip is Kwame Ture on Zionism and imperialism. Baba Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, was one of our great visionaries when it came to comprehending and explaining the need for a global liberation movement because of the global nature of the forces that collectively oppress us. This is Baba Ture on Zionism and imperialism.
The highest stage of capitalism, is it? Imperialism, the highest. That great man, V.I. Lenin, at the turn of the century, wrote a book entitled Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Is it? Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, yes. If one would read this little pamphlet, one would see here that Mr. Lenin had precisely pointed out that all of the world had already been conquered and divided by colonial powers. There was no else in the world left to be conquered or divided by colonial powers. This is the time when Zionism comes to rise. Zionism comes to look for a state when everywhere else in the world is already dominated. Thus, in order for Mr. Herzl to get a country for Zionists, what he did was to attach himself to imperialism, British imperialism in this case. quite specifically. Of course, as an African who suffered under the heels of British imperialism, I can have no love for it, and certainly I cannot love anyone who attaches themselves to it for the foundation of a state and then call this a liberation movement. Liberation movements fight against imperialism, not with it. Clearly here. Yes. The legal foundation of the State of Israel is what is known as the Balfour Declaration. This declaration was issued in 1917. A man in the government of Britain named Balfour wrote a paper and promised the Jews a national home. The national home he promised them was an area which Britain was colonizing, Palestine. Palestine didn't belong to the British. Just like Ireland doesn't belong to the British, even though they have troops there. But here, these British imperialists signed a note and gave it to the Jews and they accepted it. Where is the morality for this? If you say that Israel belongs to you, then you don't go to a thief to get Israel, you go and take it. Once you go to an immoral being such as British imperialism, and this is the basis for you getting the land, then clearly here those who are truly liberation fighters must question this. The basis, we say, is the Balfour Declaration, and Zionists know it. The Zionism is certainly not a liberation movement because it never fought against any imperialism. As a matter of fact, today, Zionism is the baby, child, and infant protector of imperialism in the Middle East. It carries out the interests of American imperialism. As a matter of fact, Zionism and American imperialism is like this. If our tax dollars would stop giving money to Israel, the state would sink tomorrow. And certainly no one can deny that American imperialism is the leading imperialist nation in the world. So we cannot see how a liberation movement is so tied, string and ham to American imperialism. They work hand in hand with American imperialism. Thus they can hardly be a liberation movement. In addition to this, Zionism has nothing to do with anything religion, nothing. All religions are concerned with human beings after they die. That's what religions are for. Islam will tell you what happens to you when you die. As a matter of fact, this which forces you to live a good life so that after death you'll be able to enjoy the rewards of heaven. The same is true for Judaism. But Zionism says nothing about the individual after they're dead. They don't give a damn about you. The Zionism has nothing to do with religion at all. And one should not make the confusion here. The Palestinian state belongs to the Palestinian people. This is a fact.
That was Baba Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. We have multiple of his books here, including his autobiography, Ready for Revolution, which is this book here. This is one of the most impactful books I've ever read. Cannot recommend it more to anybody who's interested in understanding the Black liberation movement, the Black African liberation movement, both here and on the continent. This is somebody who lived Pan-Africanism arguably more thoroughly than anybody else ever has. He really embodied the ideals that we ascribe to. So can't recommend that enough. Before we move on to our final clip and then our presenting guests for this evening, we have an organizer here from DC for Palestine to say a little bit about her organization, the work they do in Washington, D.C. on behalf of Palestinian people, and how you can support this work. Please welcome Emily Siegel of DC for Palestine.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really happy to be here today. My name is Emily, and I am a very proud DC native who grew up about 10 minutes from here and have lived in DC all my life, but found also a love for the people of Palestine through trips that I took there. And I'm also a very proud anti-Zionist Jewish person. So I really appreciate the way that Kwame Ture was talking about the difference between religion and Zionism, or Judaism and Zionism. So I'm one of the founding members of DC for Palestine. We started about a week after the October 7th attack. And our goal was really to try and make sure that our local DC government was not being swayed by the federal government and the Israeli government to support Israel, but instead to actually rise up and speak out in what they call their progressive values, to call for a ceasefire and to cut ties with Israel. When we did an entire campaign around a ceasefire resolution, which did not go through in the DC Council, and we decided we took about 6 months to do that. In the summer of 2024, we decided we're not asking for a ceasefire resolution anymore. It's too late. They've not called for the basic bare minimum, and we're not gonna be pushing for the bare minimum anymore. And so we've shifted now to working with the community to look at ways that the entire city can cut ties with Israel. So we started a new campaign called Apartheid Free DC, which I've handed you all a card about. And you can find this also on our website. And basically we're working with an international campaign that is getting businesses and community organizations and churches and synagogues and mosques and pretty much any kind of entity you can think of to sign on to a pledge saying that they will do what they can to cut ties with Israel. So we've kind of edited the pledge to be specifically about DC and also be a little bit more directly pushing for people to boycott Israeli products and to fully cut ties from Israel. So I'm gonna read the pledge just so folks can hear it. So we affirm our commitment to freedom, justice, and equality for the Palestinian people, the people of DC, and all people around the world. We oppose all forms of racism, bigotry, discrimination, and oppression. We declare ourselves an apartheid-free community, and to that end, we pledge to join others across the city to be a safe space for all people in DC seeking justice for all, and to end all support to Israel's apartheid, settler colonialism, military occupation, and genocide of Palestine. And so we've just launched this about a month ago. We already are having lots of businesses sign up to be part of Apartheid Free. So if you all know of organizations or businesses who might want to, feel free to give them this card. And the other side of what we're doing is also trying to educate the DC community about products and restaurants and things locally that may be contributing to Israel. So the other flyer that I passed out is a list of not every product that should be boycotted, but a selection of them that you can find in a lot of stores in DC, as well as some restaurants that appropriate Palestinian food and culture, and then some larger companies that also should be boycotted. And so we're really just trying to make sure that people understand where their money is going, how everyone plays a role in supporting what's happening, what Israel is doing to Palestinians, and ways that we as individuals and as communities can cut ties. And DC for Palestine is really rooted in DC communities, so we organize by ward. So we have groups in every ward that organize very locally with their neighbors and really thinking about the intersections between issues here in DC and what we see going on in Palestine. So we certainly would love anyone to join our organizing, and you can go to our website, DC4Palestine.org, and get involved with us. We're really hoping to build hundreds of entities around the city that are calling to be a part of this apartheid-free community, so we can then go back to the council and say, there is mass support across the city. You can't tell us that this is not a locally important issue, and we want you to divest from Israel completely. So that's our goal. But we're building up to it through this community grassroots campaign. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Emily. One more time for Emily, please, folks. I think it's important to honor the people who are doing the concrete work to organize and make a difference. So thank you for the work that you do and your organization does, and thank you for being here, sincerely. So we were going to do this poem from Suhair Hamad, but I think we're going to close with that because our presenter has a time limit for how long he can be here this evening, and we want to make sure that we give him as much time as we can because this is a very brilliant individual who we are lucky to have with us this evening. So it's my honor to introduce Edmund Ghareeb, an internationally known academic, journalist, and writer on Iraq, Kurds, media coverage of the Palestine-Israel conflict, the information technology revolution in the Arab world, the Arabic language pressing the United States on an ethnic and religious identity and U.S. foreign policy. He's taught at Georgetown University in Washington and in Qatar, the University of Virginia, Pepperdine University, and McGill in Canada, to name a few. He is a senior scholar at the Jerusalem Fund and the Washington Institute for Peace and Development. He was the American University Center for Global Peace's first Mustafa Barzini Distinguished Scholar in Global Kurdish Studies. He served as a co-author for the Middle East Studies program at the AU's School of International Service. He is the author or co-author of 12 books, including War in the Gulf, The Kurdish Question in Iraq, The Kurdish Nationalist Movement, Split Vision, The Portrayal of Arabs in the American Media, The Arab World in American Foreign Policy, The Historical Dictionary of Iraq, and he is a co-editor and co-translator with the late Professor Nasir Aruri of Enemy of the Sun, Poetry of Palestinian Resistance, the first Palestinian poetry book published in the United States by Drum and Spear Press, a new edition of which will be published this summer, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit this evening. Mr. Ghareeb, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks, Jordan. I really appreciate it. Thank you for that kind introduction and for the invitation. In a way, after watching this film, basically the music, the Palestinian music, songs, and then listening to Ghassan Kanafani, whom I knew when I had started working as a reporter for the Beirut Daily Star in 1970. I had studied 1 year here at Georgetown, and then went to Lebanon. I took a couple of courses at the American University of Beirut, and worked as a reporter for the Beirut Daily Star and Al Hayat newspaper. And that's where I met Ghassan Kanafani. He was an amazing figure, and he is actually the father of Palestinian resistance literature. He's the one he has written numerous, some poetry, but mostly novels, actually. And I met him first during the hijacking after the PFLP, to which he belonged, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, in Jordan, when fighting was taking place between the Jordanian army and the Palestinian organizations. And PFLP had hijacked 3 planes at that time. Basically, they wanted to send a message to the world that their cause has been forgotten, and they wanted that was a way for them to say that this is that our cause cannot be forgotten. And in fact, I was in Beirut when he was assassinated. I wrote a story about him for the Beirut Daily Star that evening. And so in a way, it brings a lot of emotions. In addition, the second thing was that also I very much enjoyed watching Kwame Toure's. I had the honor, the pleasure of meeting him and talking to him numerous times. I met him first in Baghdad in 1976 when I was doing research on the Kurdish issue and the relationship between the Kurds and the Iraqi government at that time. And the role, basically, I wanted to know more about the role the U.S., Iran, and Israel played at that time. And he happened to be attending a conference there with his wife, Miriam Makeba. And she sang that evening for the conference attendees. She was amazing, beautiful. The voice, that voice was unbelievable. In any case, after that, I met him several times, and in fact, I still have one unpublished interview with him, which I hope down the road I will be able to do that. The second thing that I want to talk, and I'll be happy to answer any questions or comments you have about what's going on today in Gaza, as well as between Iran and Israel. But what we have seen so far is that this whole issue of Palestine, it is really a conflict. This conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians is basically goes back, as was mentioned by Kwame Ture and it's well known actually that it goes back to the First World War, the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire, during the First World War, allied itself with Germany. And at that time, in the Arab world, there's a lot of opposition to the Ottomans because there was a lot of discrimination. There was repression. And so they wanted to have independence. And they talked to the British at that time. The British supported Sharif Hussein, who's the great-grandfather of the King Hussein and his son, King Abdullah. And they promised them that they would support a united Arab state after the war, if they would support them and if they would work with them. But and at the same time that they did that, and that's when the Arab revolt actually started in 1916 against the Ottoman, led by Sharif Hussein and his son, King Faisal, who later became, for a brief period, king of Syria until the French expelled him from there. They defeated his small army at that time. And later, the British helped him to become king of Iraq, and later on, basically two generations later, his grandson was killed and the monarchy was overthrown. But in 1916, Faisal led the Arab revolt, which his father, Sharif Hussein, in Mecca at that time and in Hijaz had started. But at the same time, the British had done, and the French and the Italians had something else in mind. They had already divided the region of the Middle East amongst themselves. The French got Lebanon, Syria. The British got the Arabian part of that region of the Arab world. They got Iraq, Palestine, and Jordan. And they also had mandate over Egypt. The Italians got Libya. The French were already in Algeria, Tunisia. And so basically what you saw is that the Arab world, instead of uniting, establishing one state, it became fragmented and divided among the European powers. At the same time, the British were fighting, had a difficult fight with the Germans. They needed help. And in fact, they did receive help from the Zionist movement at that time in England against the Germans. At this time, we had already begun to see the rise of a strong Zionist, active Zionist movement, which was launched in 1897, as we heard by Theodor Herzl. Herzl, actually, in fact, he predicted that there was going to be an Israeli state, a Zionist state, in Palestine 50 years from today. The conference was held in 1897. In 1947, you had the creation, 47, 48, the creation of Israel. And the British supported the migration of Jews who were And the reason, and this is where they were discriminated against in Europe, in Eastern Europe. But long before that, they were also discriminated against by a number of European states. And when the Arabs and Muslims, Arab Muslims, most of them, were expelled from Spain in the 16th century, the Jews were also expelled with them, the Jews in Spain. And where did the Jews who were expelled go? They went to the Muslim countries, Arab countries. They went to North Africa, they went to Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and Syria, as well as Turkey. That's where many Jews went, because they felt they could live safely there, and they were generally treated very well. But with the rise of the Zionist movement, this is what we saw, is that increasing migration, and ultimately there was with Western support, the Zionists were able to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. They expelled 750,000 Palestinians, which is in what's known at the time as the Nakba, or the catastrophe. And there was a war. Some Arab states became involved in that war, but they did not have the resources, the military, and the Israelis won that war. But Jordan was able to keep the West Bank and came under their control, and Egypt took control of Gaza. That event really began a series of revolts in the Arab world and led to the overthrow of numerous governments. And there were many coups and many attempted coups in the Arab world at that time. We saw the rise of Nasser, Jamal Abdel Nasser, who was the leader of the Arab revolutionary movement and at that time. And we saw the rise of the Ba'ath Party, the Renaissance Party, which really came to rule Syria and Iraq for a while. And basically one of the main reasons was because of what happened to the Palestinians. The Arabs felt that they were defeated because they were not united, and that the loss of Palestine was a major blow to them and to the Palestinian people. And that's why many people knew what happened in 1948 as the Nakba, or the catastrophe, as it was described at that time. However, as there were growing tensions between some of these states and Israel, you ended up in the 67 war, where Israel defeated Jordan and Egypt and Jordan and took control of Gaza and the West Bank. And since then, we saw the rise of a Palestinian resistance movement, which started in the early 60s because the Palestinians believed the Arabs were not doing enough to support them. So basically, that's why ultimately you saw the rise of Fatah that was led by Yasser Arafat. And then since then, however, after the 67 war, there was a decision by the United Nations that there would be a two-state solution. One Israel for basically the majority were Jewish, but there was also something like several 100,000 Palestinians were still there. And Palestinians would have their own state in the West Bank and Gaza. Many countries, even the United States, agreed, but ultimately the promises were not fulfilled, and Israel continued to control both areas. And Gaza was really a concentration camp where, while Israel withdrew from it when they reached an agreement with the region. Nevertheless, what you saw at that time, Israel controlled the air, they controlled the sea, and they controlled the land, except for a small corridor, small area bordering Egypt. And so basically, the people of Gaza were living in a very difficult, very, very difficult situation. And every once in a while, we saw attacks on Gaza, what the Israeli military called mowing the lawn. So that was what you saw in Gaza at that time. Interestingly enough, about something that you don't hear much about, I don't know how many of you know it. Do you know that, in fact, the Israelis supported Hamas? How many know that? Oh, that's quite impressive, actually. And the reason why they supported Hamas was basically because they wanted to sow division between the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas leadership. And that's what happened. So you ended up with two governments. And basically, however, the Israelis had different plans. And we saw it clearly what was happening. Every couple of years, or sometimes less than that, there would be attacks on Gaza. Many people would be killed. In the meantime, at the same time, there were numerous attacks. That's what led to the 7th of October attack. And since then, we have seen this policy of genocide and a policy of using food, water, medicine as a weapon, where we saw the attacks on schools, the destruction of schools, hospitals, churches. One of the oldest churches in the world, going back to the 3rd century, was attacked and destroyed partially in Gaza. Many mosques were destroyed as well. The Christians are a minority in Gaza, but you had both Catholic and Orthodox Christians in Gaza. And so basically what we have seen is that the Israeli government had decided that they wanted to expel, primarily they wanted to expel the Palestinians from Gaza. And in fact, just before, like a month before Hamas's attack, which was any kind of attack on any civilians, regardless of who they are, I personally would denounce and would not agree with. But what we saw at that time was that as a result of what was happening during this period, we began to see, in fact, that the Israelis began to demand that the Palestinians must leave. And they must go to either Jordan, the ones in the West Bank would go to Egypt. And there was an article about 5 weeks, I don't remember the title now, but it was published in one of the military journals in the United States, written by an Israeli strategist who said that there are some people in Israel, the right wing in Israel, who want to see the expulsion of the Palestinians in Gaza to Egypt, the Palestinians in the West Bank to Jordan, and the Palestinians in the Galilee to Lebanon. This was a month before was written, before the attack in October. Well, what we have seen now, we've seen actually what the Israelis who often say, and this is supported by the US government, basically that Israel is fighting to defend itself. Well, in fact, Israel is fighting against an oppressed, occupied region of the world, in fact, and the people who have been suffering. In fact, at one time, you couldn't even get crayons to Gaza. You couldn't get certain medicines. You couldn't get the food. And they were relying on the aid of the UNRWA and the United Nations. And look what has been happening since then. And we have seen the eruption as a result of that recently, the old new conflict with Iran, which has led to the fighting that we're hearing about. And I'll be happy to discuss it more later. But I would like to talk about another topic also that I've been talked about, and I would like to tell you a little bit about it. And this is a story that goes back to the time I was working as a reporter in the Middle East. And this, in 1969, I went to visit relatives in Lebanon, and I had started studying at Georgetown at that time. A Jordanian person who was living, had a Jordanian citizen, but he was a Palestinian friend who was studying at Georgetown at that time, asked me to go if I'd be interested in coming to Jordan. So I said, sure. So I went there. And we spent some time. And then I heard that Yasser Arafat, the leader of Fatah, the leader of the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, was there. I said, do you think I can do an interview with him? Because at the time I was also writing. I used to edit a student magazine, and I was writing for the Collegiate Press Service, which is like a Reuters or Associated Press for college newspapers. And so he said, I don't know, let's try. So he and some of his friends introduced me to the former mayor of Jerusalem, who introduced me to Arafat, and I was able to get an interview. And I was, sent it to a college paper, but I also sent it to the paper I started working with at that time in Lebanon, and I was so shocked how much attention it received. It was picked up by newspapers, mainstream newspapers, and as well as Arab papers. But the day before I was supposed to leave, he calls and he says, are you doing anything this evening? This is my friend. I said, no. He said, there's going to be Palestinian poetry reading, and would you like to attend? I said, sure, I don't have anything else. So we went there, and the poetry, it was beautiful. So I bought a couple of the books, and when I came back, I translated some of the poems to English and published them in student newspapers. About 3-4 months later, I get a call from a professor, a Palestinian professor at the University of Massachusetts, who said, I saw your translations, I'm doing some translations, how about if we work together and publish a book of Palestinian poetry? I said, that's great. So we worked, translated a number of poems, and then we started sending them to publishers. We tried 12 different publishers, every one of them said no, it doesn't fit with our program. The last one we sent it to was Beacon Press in Boston. We got a letter from the literary editor, who happened to be Jamaican, Mexican, mixed African-American, Latin. And he was also teaching part-time at Harvard at that time. He wrote a letter that he liked the poems, and we should think of how we can promote the book. Well, 4 weeks later, we get a letter, sorry, it doesn't fit with our project, works. So so I called him. I said, Carl, what's going on? I thought you liked it. He said, I'm leaving Beacon Press. He became the editor at that time of the Providence Journal in Rhode Island. But he said, well, you're starting your studies at Georgetown. Why don't you try a press called Drum and Spear Press and see what, maybe they'll publish it for you. So after a couple of months after I got to Washington, I went and looked for them, and I found their office, and I talked to somebody there. He said, sorry, but we only publish things about Africa and African Americans. So they had a small bookstore next door, so I went and was looking at the books, and then somebody comes up to me and says, can I help you? I said, I'm just looking at see what kind of books you have, but my original purpose was here. I have a manuscript of Palestinian poetry, and I was hoping that maybe it would be published, but he said the same thing. But I said, the Palestinians have a lot of things in common with the South Africans. Both are living under apartheid rule. African Americans, yes, they have been liberated to a certain extent, but they're still discriminated against, treated sometimes as second or third degree citizens, or great citizen. And he laughed, and he said, send me the manuscript. So we sent him the manuscript. 5 weeks later, he got a letter from him. He's going to publish it. They were going to publish it. They published 10,000 copies. They sold each copy for $2.50. It didn't get much coverage in the media, mainstream media, but some of the academic journals did reviews. And the book went out. We tried again to publish it a few decade or so later because some people were asking us for it. Didn't work. About just before COVID, I get a call from a professor at Tufts University, who was the head of the African Studies Department. He said he's writing an article about Palestinian-African relations. He would like to meet. If he's coming to Washington, can we meet? So I said, sure. So when he came, he called. We went out to lunch, and And so I said, what's the story that you... He said that he was doing an article about the Palestinians, but he said that he was asking, he wanted to see how and this book came out to be published by Drum and Spear Press. So I told him the story. But then he said, didn't you try to publish it again? I said, we tried, but we couldn't go anywhere. He said, but there's a lot of interest in the book now. I said, yes, but who's interested after more than 40 years since the publication of the book? He said, there's a lot of interest. He said, you don't know? I said, no. What is it that I don't know? He said, George Jackson, who was one of the leaders of the Black Panthers, was assassinated in jail. And when they sent his effects to his family, among them, there was a paper, there was a couple of poems in his handwriting. One of them was titled Enemy of the Sun. And they thought these were his poems. He published 2 books in jail while he was in jail. Probably one of the best known is Soledad Brother. And so they assumed that his family assumed it was his poetry. It was published, the poems, 2 poems, under his name. And this Greg Thomas, the professor from Tufts at the time, contacted them. And his family had apparently just also found out that he had a copy of the book. In fact, they had while he was in jail. This is, by the way, the book at that time. And they corrected it. And interestingly, the book began to get a lot of attention. A rapper, one of the rappers, I don't remember his name now, did a song. So students recently, last year, at the University of Massachusetts, an African-American student by the name of Gabriel Johnson, did pamphlet taking poems from the book, publishing it like this, had it discussed in his class with a Jewish professor who was very, very supportive, in fact, of what they were doing. And about 10 students at the university read from the poems of this book. At each poem, there would be one student would read one line, the next student would read the next line, and on and on. And the book, which sold for $2.50, I was started looking for a couple of copies. I had 2 copies with me at home, but that's all I had. So Al Jazeera wanted to do a story about it. They heard about this, and they wanted a copy of the book. So I went out to buy a copy, and I found out the cheapest copy was $250. So I told the owner, I said, look, I'm the co-editor, co-translator. So he said, okay, I'll take $50 off. And so that's what I did. And the book later on, Daphne Muse, who's a black poet, very activist, who was also, I had met her when she was working at Drum and Spear, who was a professor in California, now and a poet. She wrote me a letter to do it. She did an interview. She said the book should be published again. And she said that the book has reached $600. It was selling for $500 to $600. So we talked. We did an interview. Then she contacted me again. She said, what did you do about the book? I said, we tried to reach a couple of publishers, but there was no interest. The book reached $1,600, then $1,900. Then about a month ago, there were 2 books for sale. One, apparently in a very bad condition, was selling for $3,900. And one was selling for $4,000 in a little bit better shape. But what's more interesting, and this brings together this link between African Americans, Black Americans, and the Palestinians, was that part of the group that had founded Drum and Spear Press, they originally were with SNCC. They were members of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I'm sure you know, of which Kwame Ture was, Stokely Carmichael was the head at one time. So they had been very supportive, and a number of them actually began to talk about this. one of the person who was one of the manager of the store at that time talked to the Washington Post and said this was our best-selling book. And then they were also doing, Daphne Muse gave a number of speeches about it, plus a number of others. They began to help to connect with publishers, and ultimately they were able to connect with a publisher who in New York, 7 Story Books. And they connected me with them, and we talked to them, and they decided they will publish the book, and so hopefully it will come out in at the end of the summer. And they will sell it probably for something like $20, $24, something like that. But I added new poems to it by Palestinian poets as well as Arab poets. So basically this is, this book also had, one of the amazing things about them is that some of these Palestinian poets, while they were really fighting their own war, their own struggling to gain their rights, at the same time they were aware of what was happening. There are poems, for example, dedicated to Patrice Lumumba by Samih Al-Qasim, who is the poet who wrote the poem Enemy of the Sun. They were also talked about American Indians. They talked about the fighting of the Vietnamese. They talked about Cuba. So there was this. They talked even about Jews being discriminated against. And so there was this. It was amazing that the consciousness, the connectedness between them and other liberation movements. And this is something that helped bring out more and more interest in the Palestinian cause. So basically, I'll stop here. If there's time, we can maybe read one or two poems and 2 songs. Who is a very well-known Lebanese singer, and she sang about Jerusalem. I also, by the way, I don't know what time it is now, but if we have time, I'll be happy to answer any questions, or if you have any comments, we'll be glad to take.
Thank you, sir. It is 8:30, so what do you think?
Sorry?
It's 8:30, so we have a half hour left
Oh,
before you have
okay,
to
we
leave.
can go ahead. We can do some, maybe we'll have some questions and answers.
Yeah, let's do that.
And then we can maybe show I can read one of the poems perhaps, and we'll listen to the music.
Perfect. Okay. Any questions? Thoughts?
Hi. Thank you for being here with us. And I kind of want to build on your experience with, I kind of want to build on your experience with Kanafani and your story that you mentioned with Arafat, and just connect it to what's going on these days, because I feel like one thing that I personally have been coming across is a lot of voices kind of questioning where is the Palestinian leadership these days, and a lot of people also just shifting the burden of finding a solution and shifting the burden of organizing into the Palestinians themselves. There is almost like a group of people who are just waiting on the side for the Palestinians to organize themselves and like come together and have that perfect leadership group or whatever it is. But Kanafani was assassinated, Arafat was assassinated, among many other people, and the Palestinian community itself, I'm Palestinian as well, I was born and raised in Lebanon. I feel like there has just been so much fragmentation, as you mentioned, and so many different experiences of exile that from my perspective, it feels like almost impossible to just put everyone in the same room and expect them to like agree on anything. So yes, I guess I just wonder, what's your vision for Palestinian leadership moving forward? And maybe if you could also just reflect a bit on maybe some of the things that we wouldn't know about your experiences with Arafat and Kanafani and these other people.
This is a great question that you're asking, and because it reflects, in fact, one of the problems that the Palestinians have faced. The poor quality of leadership, especially in recent times, and the divisions among the Palestinians. The quality of the leadership earlier was when, with the rise of the PLO and other Palestinian movement, was quite different. You had people like Arafat. He had his weaknesses, but he also was a very strong leader. He was able to unite most of the Palestinians. You had people like George Habash, who was the leader of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which Ghassan Kanafani, to which he belonged. But even though they disagreed with each other on a number, but that was one of the weaknesses, is that there was fragmentation, too many different organizations. The PFLP itself divided into 3 or 4 different organizations. There were a number of organizations that were supported by the Arab governments. They were not really, I mean, yes, part of it, they were hoped that they would be able to play a role in trying to liberate the Palestinian people and liberate Palestine. But many of these served simply the Arab governments at that time. So that was another problem. And we saw, as we were mentioning earlier, how many people knew, for example, about the Israeli support for Hamas, which most people out in the West don't realize that. And this is part of, in a way, part of the problem, is that many people outside the narrative that had been heard in the West is mainly the Israeli narrative. It has not been. There's been some, but especially in recently, people are changing. I mean, now you have, for the first time, as a result of what has been going on, as a result of the role of the social media, actually, that has played a major role in influencing and informing people about what's going on. Not the mainstream media, but even now we're beginning to see people in the mainstream media. And also one of the other things that's interesting is that you're hearing people who are being supportive of the Palestinians from outside. For the first time, there were 2 polls taken, one by Pew and one by another poll. And one showed that 53% of the American people are more supportive of the Palestinians than they are of the Israelis. This is the first time in history that we had seen this. Another one was something like they had 56%. Another interesting development that has taken place as a result of what has been happening in Gaza, because a lot of people have been horrified by the pictures, the images that they have seen. For example, you have African Americans are very supportive. Asian Americans, for the first time, you began to see some Asian Americans in protests. Latinos are very, very much in support of it. Jewish Americans have been very supportive. Some of the best critics, actually, the strongest critics of the Israeli government happen to be Jewish academics and Jewish activists. And so, in a sense, what's happening now is people are beginning to realize, they're beginning to become aware of what's going on, why is this happening, what is this issue all about. The Israelis have in the past, and as we have heard time and time again, say, we are fighting to defend ourselves. The US government says they have the right to defend themselves. The German government says that Israel has the right to defend itself. The French, the British, and a few other Europeans. But that is even that is changing. A few days ago, the governments of Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Britain sanctioned 2 of the extreme ministers in Israel, being Veer and Smotrich. And they hinted that if they come to their countries, they would be arrested. I mean, this is something very, very unusual. We hadn't heard this before. But I think we are also beginning to see more solidarity among the Palestinians themselves. But they are in a very difficult situation, partly because of the divisions that exist, first of all, geographically and politically.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions?
Hello. So you've seen, in your time, you've seen kind of the ebb and flow of the history of the rise and fall and the development of anti-colonial struggles. So I feel like there's a lot of sentiment around people who aren't as conscious about these struggles that it all seems so hopeless. But I'm sure people have been saying that for decades now, and you've seen like these movements at their various highs and lows. But I feel like there's also another portion. Like I'm thinking of an interview I saw with Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine. She said that the development in Gaza has started what she calls a revolution, especially in the younger generations, and how they view American imperialism and Israel specifically and their actions in Palestine. So my question is, do you, based on your experiences, do you see things being on the upswing? Do you see this as like a turning point in history? Maybe another question would be like, where do you see this leading towards? Because I think another way that, like you said, the media is changing, the landscape is changing, people's understanding is changing. There's also more, I guess it's still not enough now, but there's still like more acknowledgement and acceptance of the idea of a one-state solution as a counter to the two-state solution that has been parroted by the UN and the US. One state being a democratic republic that protects the rights of all people in Palestine, Jewish, Arab, Christian, Arab, Israeli, what have you. So I think, I mean, maybe that's my own views, but I see it as this is a critical moment in history where we should not just assume that the struggle in Palestine will take care of itself. This is an opportunity for us to push harder, not just for Palestinian liberation, but for liberation all over the planet. So do you see this current moment as like a turning point or watershed moment in history, or do you see it as just part of a larger rise and fall, ebb and flow of history?
That's a very, very good question that you have raised. Why? Because on the one hand, Gaza has been destroyed. There was a report by, I'm trying to remember the name of the journal, a very prominent medical journal in, yes, The Lancet in London. They said more than 6-7 months ago, I don't know if you have seen it, they said that the number of people who have died and wounded are probably 186,000 people. That was several months ago. But what's happening now is that people are dying, and children are dying. The Israelis say that, the US government says, oh, we sent 7 million packages of food. Well, 7 million packages of food for 2 million people. How many packages have one? They live 1 day and a half, each one enough food for a day and a half? I mean, this is crazy. You know, they have denied UNRWA. UNRWA has the capability. They have the people. They know they would have hundreds of places. What we're seeing instead is that they said this organization that was basically this so-called Gaza Humanitarian Service or something like that, which was organized by the United States and Israel. They said 4 places. They put them 4 places, and when people go there to get the food, they are shot at. There was a child. I saw it was somebody put the picture. Was shot in the head. Another one, a kid and his grandmother were going to get food. The grandmother was killed there. He was about like something 9, 10, 11. I don't know how old he is. So that makes life very impossible right now, very difficult. And that's what President Trump wanted to talk about. He wanted to build a Riviera there. Smotrich, when the French said that Israel should go back to the 2-state solution, he said, the U.S. Ambassador Huckabee said, give them part of your Riviera. I mean, this is really, the Palestinians do not want to leave their homes. They do not want to. They have paid a very, very heavy price, actually. Yet we still hear some things like that. Nevertheless, I think the resistance of the Palestinians and the growing consciousness, awareness of what's going on in many parts of the world is beginning to put pressure. Now, you have also, as long as the U.S. continues to support Israel, I think it's going to be difficult to bring about the changes. I mean, on the one hand, for example, we're talking a little bit about what happened with Iran. The president said 2 days before the Israelis attacked Iran that he had told Netanyahu not to strike Iran before the negotiations end. There was supposed to be today there was supposed to be a meeting between the U.S. delegation and the Iranian delegation in Oman. Yet the attacks took place. What does that mean? That means either the president was aware of what was going on, and there was duplicity in a sense, or Netanyahu ignored him, didn't listen, and didn't pay much attention. And Netanyahu has been trying for a long time to draw the United States into a war with Iran. Since 1996, he has been talking about this. He's the one who played a major role, actually, in saying that what was happening in Iraq at that time, that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction that were about to destroy Britain, threaten the rest of the world, in fact, while Iraq didn't have any. It was a big lie. Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction at that time. In fact, but when they asked Secretary Rumsfeld at that time, do you know that there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq before the war? He said, yes, I know that Iraq has weapons. They said, where is this weapon? He said, the weapons are to the east of Baghdad, the west of Baghdad, the north of Baghdad, and the south of Baghdad. This was the answer of the Secretary of Defense of the United States. And I say again, it was all a lie. So basically what we are, but now you saw in the vote at the General Assembly, there were only 12 countries that supported Israel. There is a change. I mean, the policies pursued by the current Prime Minister and his right-wing government are in fact doing damage to Israel itself. So ultimately, what are the alternatives? Either a two-state solution, a one-state solution, which would include that where it would be a democratic state with equal rights. And in fact, Arafat said in one interview that I think it may have been with the Times, but I'm not 100% certain. He said, all we want is to live in peace. We want to live, in our homes, in our land, and we are not opposed to the Jewish people. We can live together. The same, but the problem is that you had, up until recently, you've had the support of the Israeli government given by Western powers. And unfortunately, we saw the results of what has happened. But I think change is coming. I think it's.
Family, I think we have time for one more question, and I see Eugenia's hand. Sorry. We can.
Good evening. Thank you for your talk. My question, I'm from Haiti, so I often look at what's going on in Palestine and how that relates to what's going on in Haiti. The situation that we face with the Dominican Republics and the way they treat Haitians and expel them.
Could you speak up, please, a little bit?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I'm from Haiti. I normally look at what's happening in Palestine in regard to what's happening in Haiti, particularly the relationship and Haiti. Is this working? Okay. Okay, normally the relationship between the Dominican Republics and Haiti, the way they have not recognized Haitian children born in the country for the past hundreds of years almost, and the way they mistreat Haitian and expel Haitians. And there's also been a deliberate attempt by the U.S. government to support the DR in minimizing Haiti and use the DR as a vessel to create destabilizations in the country. So what's happening in Palestine is somewhat happening in Haiti as well, with the gang terrorizing the Haitian population, removing the people from their homes, and the starvation, the hunger, the lack of necessity. Can you talk a little bit more about that one-state solution? What will that look like? Is that even feasible? And what would happen to the rights of the Palestinian people who's been fighting for so long to exist as a nation.
No, I think that's a very good point. And there is a great deal of resemblance from, although I don't know enough about the topic what's happening, but I've read a little bit about it. And yes, it is a big problem. So in many ways, I think ultimately what happens, what's likely to happen, a great deal will depend. I think what the coming few days and weeks, in fact, will determine where things, the direction, where things are going to go. Because what's going on, so far, what the Israeli leadership had thought that by attacking Iran and doing to Iran what they did to Hezbollah in Lebanon and to the leadership of Hamas, they believed that by eliminating the leaders, by killing a lot of their own fighters and their own people, that they are going to, this will bring about change. It will mean that Israel will be able to fulfill its dreams in many ways. And this is what they tried to do in Iran. What we have heard just before the attack on Iran, that the Iranian government is weak, the Iranian government is basically very corrupt, that the people of Iran do not support their own government, that Iran is very close to building a nuclear weapon, and therefore we must act now. And they did hit, in fact, they hit, it shows that they had penetrated actually the leadership or some elements of it in Iran. So they were able to reach and kill a large number of the military leaders, some of the top nuclear scientists, as well as some of the people who were in charge of the nuclear program. And they believe that this might lead to an uprising against the government, or might lead the government of Iran because it wanted to survive, to submit and to agree to the idea of zero, enrichment of uranium. The U.S. intelligence services have been saying, including what's her name, Tulsi Gabbard, who is the head of all the intelligence services, that testified before Congress that there's no evidence that the Iranians are building a nuclear weapon. So basically it was a lie. This is similar to what happened with Iraq, when I said the Iraqis have nuclear weapons. But the danger is that, in fact, if Iran is pushed, even if it's right now destroyed, etc., although I don't think it's going to be easy to penetrate to the facilities, nuclear facilities, which are built under the mountains. I mean, U.S., from what I understand, I don't know enough about this, but I read one report that says the U.S. has bombs that could go down something like 60 feet. Some said 60 meters. I don't know. Does anybody here, has anybody know anything about this? But even that would not work if you have some of the facilities deep under the mountains in Iran. Will that push the Iranians, even if they are defeated later on, to build nuclear weapons? In fact, that's what. If you take a look what happened, for example, look what happened with Libya. Well, look how Libya gave up its efforts, all its work to build some kind of nuclear capability. And they weren't actually trying to build a bomb, but there was the concern about that. And Gaddafi was killed. What did Mrs. Clinton, Hillary Clinton, say? She said, we came, we saw, he died. Well, how about North Korea? The North Koreans built their own nuclear capability. Nobody's attacking them. So this might lead the Iranians to build nuclear weapons. So basically, this is something that's very important. And this is why I think it's important to recognize the rights of all the people, not just the people of one country, like what you were talking about, where the support. But unfortunately, what happens today in much of the world, people it's their interest that determines what the policy is going to be. And sometimes there is also racism as well. That's another factor that you see. But I think it's just interest. Where they consider their interest is, that's where they act and they behave. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. So it is 8:53. So do we maybe have time for one poem before you have to leave? Okay.
What time is it, by the way?
8:53.
Okay.
54 now.
Let's see. I'll read maybe the poem that is.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Can I just say something? Sorry, I came late and I apologize. But for me, even when we explain, what happens is we get entrapped in the logic of the imperial syntax. In other words, Israel is the most dangerous country in the world now by its own act. And it does have nuclear arms. And therefore, to me, it's really, to even say they shouldn't have, is a whole dangerous dialogue to enter, because it's this Eurocentric, white supremacist language itself, makes you not discuss why is Israel not be the object of prohibition from, if they mean it well, than other people who are just beginning to, who's starting up. I don't know if you already addressed this issue, but to me, the discussion itself, we third world people, Africans, Asians, Arabs, we make big mistake entering into their logic of discussion.
I think, no, you made an excellent point, and this is partly the reason why you have had so many, that's why many of these people were not able to succeed, in a sense. They have been, the Palestinians and the Arabs have been trying to regain the rights of the Palestinians since 1940s and early 50s. But part of it, they've trusted what the British were telling them, sometimes the UN, but the UN is controlled, again, to a large extent. So that is part of the problem, in a way. But I think we're beginning to see changes. And also people are seeing also in a way that how the double standards, how they're, for example, when it comes to the Israelis, they haven't allowed the IAEA to go and inspect. They have.
But they are saying now the inspector himself, the UN inspector's decision or position on Iran is why one of the reasons for them to go and take care of it.
Exactly.
So it doesn't matter what we say. Once we locate ourselves in their dialogue, then we lose, because the very dialogue is warped.
That's a very good point, because actually I was reading an article by one of the Iranian, he's living outside, the former official, but he's living outside Iran, and he's critical of the regime. But he said, a trap was set for us when we fell into it.
Yes, sir. Do we still have time to read one poem?
Let me see if, I'll just read you this poem, one poem which is the title of this book. And there are some beautiful poems, actually, and I hope that you'll get a chance to read it. By the way, also, Professor Greg Thomas did an exhibit about the book, based on the book, and about the relations between African Americans and Palestinians and Africans. And he had an exhibit in Ramallah, in Palestine, in Boston, and in California as well. And he has also written a number of articles Okay. I may, if you wish, lose my livelihood. I may sell my shirt. I may sell my shirt and bed. I may work as a stone cutter, a street sweeper, a porter. I may clean your stores or rummage your garbage for food. I may lie down hungry, O enemy of the sun. But I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse in my veins I shall resist. You may take the last strip of my land, feed my youth to prison cells. You may plunder my heritage, you may burn my books, my poems, or feed my flesh to the dogs. You may spread a web of terror on the roofs of my village, O enemy of the sun, but I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse of in my veins I shall resist. You may put out the light in my eyes. You may deprive me of my mother's kisses. You may curse my father, my people. You may distort my history. You may deprive my children of a smile and of life's necessities. You may fool my friends with a borrowed face. You may glue my eyes to humiliations, O enemy of the sun, but I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse of in my veins I shall resist. I shall not compromise. The decorations are raised at the port. The ejaculations or ululations fill the air, a glow in the hearts, and in the horizon a sail is seen, challenging the wind and the depths. It is Ulysses returning home from the sea of loss. It is the return of the son of my exiled ones, and for her sake and his, I swear I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse in my veins I shall resist, resist, and resist.
Thank you, Mr. Edmund Ghareeb, and I know you have to run out for your next engagement. One more time, please, folks. And I hope that when the book does re-release this summer, do you know exactly when it's supposed to release?
Sorry?
Do you know exactly when the book is supposed to release this summer?
It'll be in July or August.
Okay. Would folks like to see him back in July or August when the book launches? Okay. Yes, sir. So hope you be open to coming back. Family, we were going to show another poem and play some music, but maybe we'll leave something for next time when Mr. Ghareeb comes back to talk about the release of his book. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Our objective here with this event, this Gaza on Our Minds event, which we've been doing for a year now today, is not just to examine these different individual situations in Gaza, Haiti, Sudan, and the Congo, but to really deeply interrogate the unities between these struggles and their shared sources. And so the way that we can do that effectively is if we continue to come and bring our bricks to these gatherings and add in what we can. When Mama Eugenia asked her question where she was relating what happened, what's going on in Haiti to what's going on in Palestine, that's the exact kind of inquiry that we're trying to foster here in this space. So we hope to see you here again in 2 weeks for Sudan on Our Mind. And thank you for being here.
على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك، لتشم تراب بلادي وترسم عحجار ومجدك.
ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك، لتشم تراب بلادي ترسم عحجار ومجدك.
ميل على شاطئ حيف خدلك من رمل وتذكار، صورة بشوارع يافا وعلى صورة العكا مشوار.
ميل على شاطئ حيف خدلك من رمل وتذكار، صورة بشوارع يافا على صورة العكا مشوار.
ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك. القدس وشوارعها وسماها أجمل مكان. ميل عنا وسال عنا احنا للكرم عنوان.
وإذا بدك تتهنى الناس بتبعت سلام، قاعدة تحلى بيك أهلا بوجودك حلو الكلام.
ميل على وادي عار ركوة القهوة عالنار، شرفنا حارة حارة قلوبنا لعيونك دار.
ميل على وادي عار وركوة القهوة عالنار، شرفنا حارة حارة قلوبنا لعيونك دار.
ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر
كيف البحر بيضحك لك.
لفيت بلاد لفيت ما لقيت بجمالك ما لقيت، ولا حتى جبالك والورد وعصافيرك بتغني. يابا ليل